Is it just luck that the two most influential articles in the development of sociolinguistics were published in Word? Kirk Belnap is professor of Arabic at Brigham Young University. He received his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and is the editor with Nilofar Haert of Structuralist Studies in Arabic Linguistics, Charles A. Ferguson's papers 1954 to 1994, published by Brill in 1997. More recently, he has been looking at students' anxiety during intensive overseas language study by measuring hair cortisol and heart rate variability. Unfortunately, we won't be hearing about that. So here he is, putting diglossia in its place.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to participate today. I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Charles Ferguson, to Fergie, and I suspect we all do, given his influence on so many fields of linguistics, and we certainly do for his modeling for us how to be both a scholar and a wonderful human being. So my little bit on my story. Ferguson recently retired from Stanford, wrote a paper on grammatical agreement variation in Arabic that was published in 1989. I learned of it before it was published and contacted him, and one thing led to another, and he was on my dissertation as a committee as an external member. Um, One of those, yeah. Hard to ask for more than that. I'm also, and another interesting is he consented to be on the committee on condition that our interaction would be by telephone. And I couldn't ask for more than that. Um, I'm also honored to participate in this session with Gillian Sankoff, who was my dissertation chair. Her work on language contact was particularly helpful to me as I worked through questions having to do with history of Arabic. And I also mentioned that that is my let's see, there we go, my co-author Nilofar Haeri, who really should be doing this, or anyway, she's otherwise engaged in London, and she and I had the opportunity as we were putting together the Ferguson's papers on Arabic linguistics, as we were working on the idea for and the background for this. We were fortunate to sit with him, actually first in a hospital. He was had a close call, and then in his garden with his wife Shirley closely supervising. And we were of course very nervous about this, but he just had so much he wanted to talk about, and so we taped these interviews back in 1994, and they have become such a marvelous rich source of background information on what was happening in his professional and personal life. We also benefited from not long before this. Tom Hubner had done similar with Ferguson, where he had met with him regularly to put together sort of the backstory on. So between these two experiences, volumes, and the interviews and connected with them, and an autobiographical essay that he published, we have a lot of background on where diglossia came from. But let's jump into the definition here that he gave. So he has right up front, he says diglossia is a relatively stable language situation in which, in addition to the primary dialects of the language, which may include a standard or regional standards, there is a very divergent, highly codified, often grammatically more complex, superposed variety, the vehicle of a large and respected body of written literature, either of an earlier period or in another speech community, which is learned largely by formal education and is used for most written and formal spoken purposes, but is not used by any sector of the community for ordinary conversation. And I'll point out that this definition of diglossia became the prevailing sense for the Anglophone world, but Fishman happened to get translated before Fishman's article on diglossia had happened to get translated before his, and so in Romance-speaking world, this Fishman tends to predominate. So according to Keith Walters. Following Fergie's passing in 1998, I will refer to him as Fergie, as he was affectionately known on and off. Just that's what we do. We know him well, and we're a small group. And anyway, following his passing, in '98, I approached Joshua Fishman about doing a special issue on Arabic sociolinguistics for the International Journal of Sociology of Language to honor Ferguson. And I invited my former teacher, Bill Above, to contribute a short piece to provide a broader perspective on this founding figure and his influence. Bill wrote, "When I first entered the field of sociolinguistics," oh, here's that. Here we go. This is the resulting volume. When I first entered the field of linguistics, sociolinguistics had already been created, and the most important general statement of its principle is still to be found in Ferguson and Gumper's Introduction to Linguistic Diversity in South Asia, 1960. In the 4 decades that followed, the man we all spoke of as Fergie continued to formulate general ideas and principles, drawing from an incomparable wealth of linguistic competence that somehow managed to lead us in sensible direction. I'm going to pause here and say just that his mention of sensible is very much a term that was that Ferguson used all the time in our interviews, over and over again. Ferguson would judge things as to whether, well, was it a sensible? Did it go somewhere insightful? Was it useful? Was it so forth? So in a sensible direction. Back to Bill. No one surpassed Fergie in breadth and vision. No one knew better what was an intellectual quagmire and how to avoid it. No one could better recognize a blind alley and point us toward the proper opening out of it. He continues, Ferguson was not the perfect linguist. He had many limitations, as he was the first to point out, but he came as close to it as anyone reasonably could. No one else has been able to write with such acumen and insight across such a spectrum of linguistic problems. The history of German and Romance, the general problem of long-term drift, the nature of the Creole copula, the acquisition of literacy and religious movements, the acquisition of phonology by children. It would be out of place for me to try to review all the contributions of his that impressed and informed me. What I would like to do is to reflect on several ways in which he intersected with my own work, reoriented my thinking, and saved me from the mistakes that I would otherwise have made. And Bill goes on to talk about four different cases, the last being this question of drift in Germanic that Ferguson wrote for Bill's Festschrift. In an effort to situate Diglossia, whose publication has been singled out as the advent of sociolinguistics by at least one person, I want to read from Fishman's introduction to the 2-volume Festschrift for Ferguson. It gives an even broader perspective on his scholarly interests and professional contributions. I quote, "Indeed, it is difficult to find rivals to Ferguson in connection with either scope of interest or depth of contribution. Accordingly, scholars from half a dozen different areas of specialization recognize Ferguson as a mentor and indeed as a force who unites them and who points out their relevance for each other and for the total language-related enterprise. Child language as well as baby talk and Arabic, universals and sociolinguistics, phonology and applied linguistics, language of religion and sports announcer register. In Ferguson's hands and mind, these all come together and enrich each other and pose questions to each other. Ferguson has not only contributed to all of these areas, but he has impacted them, adding to their depth, widening them, interrelating them in his own work, and introducing them to each other via his influence on the thought of countless students and colleagues. Bernard Spolsky, let's see, I think I have that was Fishman. There you go, from the Fishman. Yes, Spolsky. Spolsky, in his typical fashion, provides a detailed overview of the development of the fields of sociolinguistics and the sociology of language by comparing and contrasting Ferguson and Fishman. He concluded that Ferguson's strength was in innovative recognition of topics of sociolinguistic relevance. And we certainly see that in the variety of his publications on sociolinguistics, ranging beyond really to other fields like folklore. So let's talk about where did this come from? Well, Ferguson wrote in his autobiographical sketch that his curiosity about spoken language variation began with listening to his grandmother talk with neighbors in German. And in order to find out how the German language worked, he bought a German phrase book. But he soon discovered that his grandmother's German was not the German described in the book. And same thing goes for his, I believe, for his wife's German that she had picked up from home. He attributes the beginnings of his awareness of language variation to this experience. He also noted in his sketch that in his early teen years, he developed a fascination with all foreign languages, as well as with some of the phenomena of English. As a high school student, he read a lot of books on linguistics and attended the 1938 Linguistic Society of America meetings held in his hometown, Philadelphia. Thanks to a scholarship, he was able to study at the University of Pennsylvania, where nominally a philosophy major, he studied a number of languages, among other things. He then embarked on a graduate work in Penn's Department of Oriental Studies with Zelig Harris as his mentor. Great to have the talk on Zelig Harris earlier. By that time, Harris had fully turned his attention to developing, quote, scientific methods for describing modern spoken languages, end of quote. And his zeal rubbed off on Ferguson. Ferguson held him in high regard as a teacher and felt that Harrison thought all too highly of him. But in our interviews, Ferguson noted that, quoting Ferguson's take on some reflections on Harris, from my taste looking back at him from later, he cared too much about theory. He didn't care about the facts of the language as much as I feel he should have. For example, he would come up with little problems that he would share with you, and he'd fill the board full of formulas and so forth. And then someone would point out, oh, but it isn't really that way, you know, it works this way. And he would say, oh, let's pretend it works the other way. But he'd be more interested in the nature of the problem than he was at finding out how Cherokee worked. And that was perfectly typical of Harris. Not that he wasn't very good when he worked on facts and so forth, but that really wasn't his interest. So he's very much in this mode of getting on with distributionalism and tweaking the method. Such experiences no doubt instilled in Ferguson a cautious approach to theory making and likely contributed to his being particularly devoted to getting the facts of a language accurate as much as possible. Elsewhere in our interviews, he observed, I have great respect for getting accurate information about languages. That is very high on my list of virtues. But he also stressed that he was not anti-theory. I don't want people to make too strong a view of my being apparently non-theoretical or anti-theoretical, because usually my objections are to claims that are made for theory, which are far beyond anything reasonable. I've always been doubtful rather than anti or something like that. And that was true when I was an ardent structuralist, even though I had the same kind of arrogance that all linguists have, no matter what theory they have. I also felt there was a long way to go before we really understood everything. Selig Harris played another key role as linguists were recruited to help with the war effort. As part of this effort, Ferguson was tasked with describing Moroccan Arabic because he was the junior member of Harris' team of 3 graduate students, and Harris had already worked on Moroccan. Ferguson began traveling to New York City to work with a Moroccan couple and eventually spent the summer of 1942 there working with them. Regarding this fieldwork experience, he wrote, "I did learn a lot about the structure and use of human languages in general, and Arabic in particular. Much of it matters that could not easily be learned from textbooks of linguistics." And he goes on to describe the difficulty of working with the husband who had been contaminated by his memorization by his literacy and memorization of some Quran. I mean, much he preferred working with the wife who was illiterate and wouldn't argue with him about how things were said. In our interviews, he added that the basic facts, he said in the interviews, the basic facts of what I call diglossia struck me immediately about the Arab world before I even got to the Arab world. Various aspects of Arabic would continue to fascinate him with publications focused on it, beginning in 1954, book reviews, and extending to 1990, most with some sort of sociolinguistic connection. Having written his dissertation on Bengali, South Asia would similarly continue to occupy his attention for decades. While working on his dissertation, Ferguson mentioned in our interviews, "I got to know a man named W.D. Preston, and he was a great influence on me in odd ways. He was a folklorist by training. He had been trained in folklore at Indiana University, so he influenced me a lot. That is, he made it clear to me that you could study folk literature in some systematic ways, and it was in some ways not different from doing linguistics, the kind of linguistics I wanted to do. You would find structure if you looked for it. It could be accurate. It changed over time and all the rest. So he convinced me of all those things, and that was not wasted. It all became part of my ways of looking at the world." Ferguson told us that he saw himself as a folklorist in addition to being a linguist. And there's one more example of the many experiences early in his life. His exposure to uh, uh, discussions of the translation of liturgy in church from Latin to modern languages, and a whole host of um, discussions he had with as a young teenager. I think he was in junior high, with a fellow who lived across the street from the school and was an expert was actually working in epigraphic. I think it was epigraphic South Arabic, and uh, very, very wide-ranging interests in language, even young as youngster. While still a grad student, Ferguson attended a lecture by Roman Jakobson and became fascinated by his work on child language development. He began commuting once a week to New York to attend Jakobson's course on phonetics and phonology at Columbia University. Harris and other American linguists were highly critical of the Prague School, but exposure to Jakobson opened the door to his warming to the Prague School, of which he said, "The more I read them, the more I thought they really have something. I liked the fact that they were socio in orientation, much more than the American linguists were at the time. That is, they cared about such things as whether the language is standardized or not, or what the functions of language were, and so on. I thought, gee, that's great stuff. Why don't Americans pay more attention to that?" Ferguson finishes his graduate program, teaches at Penn for a year, German and some Moroccan Arabic, very discouraged by the experience of trying to teach German to his students. And in 1947, and the position paid almost nothing, right? So in 1947, Ferguson accepted a position at the newly created Foreign Service Institute of the U.S. Department of State, about which he wrote, "My academic friends were displeased by this apparent betrayal of academic loyalties, but it was a wonderful opportunity for me, and I never regretted the decision. For the next 20 years, I was constantly operating with a professional tension between solving practical language problems and doing academic linguistics. In our interviews, he stressed that because of this job, quote, I had many more opportunities of going to a variety of places and experiencing different language situations. Given his previous experience with Arabic, the lot fell to him to establish an Arabic field school. He spent most of 1947 and 48 setting up a trial run in Beirut, and later returned from 53 to 55 to run the Arabic language school. The linguistic variety found in Lebanon, even just in the city of Beirut, was eye-opening for him, as was the fact that speakers of Damascus Arabic and the Lebanese could communicate readily, in spite of significant differences in their vowel systems. There he also read the works of European scholars, Semiticists like Bergstrasse and Cantuneau, whose descriptions of Arabic dialects impressed him a great deal, including some sociolinguistic details that he later often used in his teaching on sociolinguistics. From 1955 to 59, Ferguson taught Arabic at Harvard's newly founded Middle East Center. He took the job on condition that he also be affiliated with the linguistics program. Colleagues at Harvard included Roman Jakobson and Del Hymes. On a personal note, I had the opportunity at Penn to enroll in Hymes' ethnopoetics seminar and did some work on the Quran, which gave me something of a feel for different flavors of sociolinguistics. Ferguson shared an office there at Harvard. Ferguson shared an office for a year with the Israeli Arabist linguist Haim Blanc, and was deeply impressed by him and the work he was doing that would result in his book, Communal Dialects in Baghdad. We also see in the references Ferguson provided at the end of his article Diglossia, there we see listed a Harvard dissertation by Salah Toma that Ferguson had advised and that was completed in 1957. So, title of that dissertation, The Teaching of Classical Arabic to Speakers of the Colloquial in Iraq, a study of the problem of linguistic duality. You can see him at work, very much at work there. What would become Diglossia. Ferguson left Harvard to become the founding director of the Center for Applied Linguistics, where he oversaw a variety of sociolinguistic projects, including the publication of Labov, The Social Stratification of English in New York City, and a linguistic survey that twice took him to Ethiopia for 4 months each time, doing surveys. Yeah, in 1963, he organized the Committee on Sociolinguistics of the Social Sciences Research Council that led to the milestone 1964 seminar on sociolinguistics at the Linguistic Summer Institute in Bloomington. And this committee operated, and he chaired it on into the early 70s. Members of the committee included Fishman, Gumpers, Hymes, and Labov. Uriel Weinreich visited the 1964 Linguistic Institute and gave 4 lectures on semantic theory. Fishman noted that his theory of semantics was, quote, profoundly cultural and socio-situational. After 7 years at Cal, he was ready for a change. And at Stanford University, he became the architect of one of the country's premier linguistics departments. And better yet, he found himself free to explore his interests in sociolinguistics and in the language development of children. He served during this time he served on the executive board of Language and Society's editorial board from its founding in 72 till 92. His many papers in sociolinguistics, which saw an increase during this period, have been widely reprinted. On his work in sociolinguistics, Ferguson observed, my interest in the role of language in society was actually of long standing. I had always viewed language as primarily a social phenomenon, and with the new Chomskyan emphasis on language as a matter of individual cognitive competence, I felt that one of the principal problems of linguistics was how to understand the relation between individual competence and socially shared competence, what I have since come to call the problem of conventionalization. My own contributions to sociolinguistic research had been quite varied, concerned with different types of language situation and their possible outcomes over time, the processes of language standardization, language planning, and public policy, in particular language problems of so-called developing countries and register variation, that is, variation in linguistic structure, correlating with different occasions of use. I want to transition now to looking at where is diglossia, sort of the use of this term and what's happening nowadays. So here in the LBA database, we see that since 1972, when this begins, we have quite an increase. And I don't think you can interpret the 2020 to 2029 as being somehow diglossia has fallen off is falling off the map, given that we have a number of years to go in the decade. I thought, okay, I did a kind of a randomly was looking at very recent work and ran across this study by a scientist at the Research Center for the Study of Learning Disabilities in Haifa, University of Haifa. This was published in Brain Science, and interestingly, Ferguson isn't even mentioned in this article. His name never occurs. Here's the definition that they provide. Spoken form. So the spoken form of Arabic, Amiya, spoken Arabic, local dialect, is used by speakers of the language in a specific geographic area for daily verbal communications, and it is. And I need to read the whole thing, although so it says so when we look at this. When we look at this, it is essentially Ferguson's uh, uh, definition, and when you look at the footnote here, the reference to it, Ferguson is mentioned in this study and actually that's by the same author. But I found that really interesting that you could have an article that uses diglossia as a technical term and doesn't even mention uh, uh, Ferguson. Says something about it's taking its place. If you look at the other articles, the other things cited in this article, this is the only one that's really even. I mean, none of them are anything but something like applied psycholinguistics or in brain science or something like that. This is a term that has about which apparently there isn't too much debate in some circles, and has become quite practical. And speaking of this study, it does show that there are overlap, if I remember correctly. There's a good deal of overlap with what you would expect from a bilingual context, but also some significant differences, which sort of helps us to see that Ferguson's sensible notion of not defining diglossia so broadly that it could apply to almost any context or too narrowly, that his concept was apparently quite sensible as Bill commented. So I appreciate your patiently listening and look forward to whatever comments, questions you might have to ask.
Okay. Thanks very much. And you were absolutely spot on time. That was great. Thanks very, very much. So there's applause on the screen, but are there hands for questions? Okay, not seeing any questions at the moment. Rich? Yeah, Richard. You're if you're talking, you're muted. Okay, that looks better. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Kirk. I was Ferguson's student at Stanford and had the same feeling about him. I don't think he waxed his forehead or his skin, but there was a sort of a glow around his head all the time. That was incredible. Um, and he had a steely side. Um, I was intrigued by simplified registers, so I wrote a paper for a class of his on note taking as a simplified register, and he thought that was really ironic that people take notes in linguistics and no one had written a paper about it that he knew of. So he helped me get that published. But
Way to go.
I had there's some references, and he said, I wrote a paper about that topic, and then I gave him another draft, and he said, you really ought to cite my paper on that topic. And the third time he said, cite my paper. So I don't know if there are any students listening, but there are many teachers. And I have this predilection anyway, but I get told I work on too many things, for example. Someone said that to me at a conference. And Ferguson showed that you can work on many things. You can write one paper on a topic, and as if it's a seminal paper, it doesn't matter if you never work on that again. Now, he actually did continue, but you listed the things. I mean, short A in Philadelphia, and diglossia, and baby talk, and child language acquisition, and simplified registers, and genre, and phonemes of Bengali. And all of them are influential. Arabic Koine, did I say? So you have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge. But you were saying he could tell a dead end. Don't go there. Don't take this approach. And then being a memorable speaker, he could come in. I remember he came when I was teaching at the University of Arizona. He happened to show up and summarize theories of language acquisition. And those are some of the, I still have those notes because he summarized various different approaches. One of them was the view that children stumble into language, the way he put it. He could come up with these phrases. And then the experiences, like, as you said, traveling, that was very clever of him to be able to go. The language, what is called the Linguistic Survey of Ethiopia, and his, he meshed with his Christianity. So he talked about a speaker of Ge'ez who said, oh, we don't go into the church. We sit outside and we listen through the windows. He said, no, I'm sorry, I got this wrong. Who's not a speaker of Ge'ez. He said, the liturgy is in Ge'ez. I don't understand it. Men sit outside and we listen to what comes through the window. And that is the most profoundly religious experience of my life. Hearing a language that I do not understand, filtered through the windows while I'm on the outside and it's on the inside. And it gives you a different appreciation of Latin for people who don't understand it, for example, who want the Tridentine Mass to come back. But what a guy and what a model. And he wasn't the one, but I took one of my first linguistics classes from him. It was Greenberg, Ferguson, and Dorothy Huntington was a surgeon in the medical school who worked on phonetics. But the terrible course review was, together, Ferguson, Greenberg, and Huntington have the effect of a powerful non-addictive sedative. But that was not Ferguson. And if he taught the course by himself, it would have been very different. So I'm so glad I knew him, and thank you for sharing even more about this that I didn't know about.
Okay.
Well, thank you for sharing. You, yeah, I loved that 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 you talked this morning on David. If you're with us, I'm not sure on Harris came back to child language acquisition, right? Fergie loved to point out with how people, from from Jakobson to Chomsky laid great claim on the importance of dealing with the acquisition questions. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Gillian.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I heard now? Okay, thank you very much for this, Kirk. I was really thrilled to hear many facts about Fergie that I hadn't known. He was also somebody who was very important in my own life, mainly from reading him. But then later on, he did things like let me stay in his house when he was away because I happened to be at Stanford for some reason. So I was really a generous and wonderful person, and I learned a lot from your talk. I wanted to say also that to thank Nilüfer for her contribution. You and she, of course, were both great students of ours, and very happy with what you've done. About Fergie, just one more comment was that I was at that 1964 seminar that you mentioned in the LSA Summer Institute, but I had just gotten my BA that year and I didn't know anybody, and junior students were not welcome at those committee meetings. So I did not get to hear the exchanges between the people you mentioned, but I do remember one great forum lecture by Roman Jakobson, which was about Russian poetry, which I knew nothing about, but hearing him deliver it was quite a trip. So thank you both again very much. I hope that we get to read that paper because there was so much in it that I was hearing for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. I should mention about Nilüfer. I think it's quite interesting that she went on. So she was very much wrote a dissertation, sociolinguistic dissertation with just lovely details about the Cairo speech community and women's innovations there and palatization and so forth. She went on to write let's see, just a book about women and prayer and poetry in Iran that is it's won a couple of really nice awards and is a beautiful thing. I asked her, I said, well, so did Fergie was he the inspiration for this? And she said, well, the real inspiration, if you read the foreword, was a woman she knew well, of her coming out and having finished her prayers and reflecting on these prayers in a way that really caught Nilüfer's attention. And so she went back and did this ethnographic study. But I said to Nilüfer, I said, Fergie had talked to us such a generous compliment. He said, you my editors are kindred spirits. And I just thought, well, you don't get and Nilüfer really is this work that she has done on prayer and women in poetry, these poetry circles in Tehran. It's very much in a sort of direction that I'm sure Ferguson would love to see.
Okay, we still have about 5 minutes, so there would be time for another question or comment. Anybody else? Yeah, Rich?
Jakobson came up, and Ferguson had a story about him that although he was interested in child language, he wasn't interested in children. And when someone brought him a child and said, Professor, Jakobson is a child, wouldn't you like to listen to him? He said, no, take the child away. But it reminds me, Gillian should tell this, because Bill LeBove had a joke about Jakobson and child language. And I'll tell it because my wife said it made her like me when we were first meeting. That a man comes to Jakobson and says, Professor Jakobson, your theory says that my child's first word should be something like ka or pa, but his first word was fish. What do you think of that? And Jakobson said, phonetically, fish, phonemically, pa.
Oh, that's
I can say I do remember that story. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes, during which time we should also get set up for the next talk by Gillian.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.